Hey, I'm Clay Moffett, and welcome to Moffett on Money. It's it's been a little while, granted, between being sick, some of the Murdoch things going on. It's been a busy time, but finally here, trying to get a little bit back on track and finish up with the Great Reset, which was promised a month ago, or probably even a little further back. I may be slow, but I keep my promises. I really appreciate you tuning in and staying with us. For those watching the replay, if you will, don't forget to do the YouTubey things, hit like, subscribe, all those wondrous things that help, our little channel grow. We do appreciate you. Now, today on the Great Reset, we've had the two other previous parts. We've talked about the ideas of the Great Reset. We've talked about some of the practical realities of the Great Reset. Today, we'll look at kind of what to expect and prepare for in the future going forward. Now, to understand this, how do I want to word this? One must understand that economic systems do not exist in the abstract. They have tangible, practical applications, practical outworkings. The ideas have consequences. They are embedded within the geographic and structural fabric of the society. The way property is used, the way property is controlled, the locations of homes and businesses, the ability to start businesses, the infrastructure that ties or separates people, places, and commerce. All of that is a natural outworking of the economic system. Okay. So, how does the Great Reset, how does the WEF, the World Economic Forum, see itself shaping the future? I guess we're kind of lucky in one sense. We don't have to try to guess. We don't have to wonder. They tell us directly what they want to do. They're rather open about it. If you'll remember, in one of the previous videos, I showed you the 8 predictions. This was produced and exist on the WEF's YouTube channel. 8 predictions for the future if the WEF gets their way. Let's take a minute, because it's only a minute and a half video, but they detail 8 interesting predictions. So let's watch that for a second. And in case you want to see the predictions in writing, they list them on their website, WF Forum /agenda /predictions for the world, whatever. But they boldly list them. All products will become services. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own appliances or any clothes. Their motto is, you will own nothing and be happy. Global price on carbon. All carbon fuels will have additional taxes and become increasingly expensive, prohibitively expensive. Their goal is clearly to get rid of carbon energy, cheap energy. U.S. dominance is over. Interesting comment considering how we produce most of the world's goods and food, or the largest producer thereof, I should say, as well as the reserve currency. So some interesting implications with their goal there. Farewell hospital, hello homespital. You've got the eating less meat, refugees, and values that built the West will have been tested to the breaking point. So they're all there. Feel free to give them a look. So they tell us what they're going to do in the future. They're not bashful about it. Now, we've seen their benefits, or their claimed benefits, and their 8 predictions. Just to summarize or mention them. Basically, they talk about you'll own nothing. Well, if you own nothing, you have no property rights. Something our forefathers thought was essential to liberty and freedom. Liberty was impossible without property rights, because owning no property is the historical position of slaves. You'll rent everything. You'll always be paying someone else. You'll always be indebted to someone else for everything. There'll be zero independence, zero opportunity to be independent. Everything will be delivered by drone. You won't need to leave the house. You won't have need for, such transportation as a car. What you're allowed will be sent to you impersonally. Focus on the impersonal and the needs of the collective. That's the whole underlying trend. The U.S. won't be a superpower anymore. It'll be just one of many nations. Now, this is a little bit harder to explain, but it will have severe repercussions for the world. One, we produce most of the world's goods and food. Without that production, well, you can figure that out. Our currency is the world's reserve currency. That means the US dollar is the currency of business internationally. You can buy and sell most anything in dollars around the world. Without having the dollar as the reserve currency, our production, our lifestyles will be reduced to the world average, which is ultimately their goal. The world's average will also decline. You won't wait for organs. Well, that sounds pretty cool. Well, what that really means is the WEF will control your bodies and the parts, all of it for the good of the collective. You won't own property or your own body. Medicine will be dispensed as the collective deems it necessary. Remember, with lower living standards and less small businesses, no private businesses or development, there will be less medical innovation. The U.S. has led the world in medical innovation for, 100 years. Most of the socialist nations or communist nations actually free ride on our medical innovation, research, and development. We do more than the rest of the world combined. If that's taken away, then what happens to medical innovation? You will eat much less. Now, I pointed this out in part 2, particularly with the example of Sri Lanka and its utter devastation in food production by implementing the WEF's energy and pesticide, insecticide, requirements, mandates, goals, whatever you want to call them. Now, I know some believe that some thought maybe I was exaggerating or even just outright nuts. But again, I'm taking these people at their word. They're not really shy about their vision. You just have to look at the ideas they actually promote and then understand how those ideas will come into being. How do they bring them about? And then look at the consequences of such. Less meat, for example. Meat has been the staple for the human race over the past 10,000 years. It provided far more protein and calories than collecting and eating plants, and did it far quicker. This gave more time for other things and enabled better brain development, according to scientists. Remember, we'll have less productive farming because you can't use insecticides, you can't use fungicides, you can't use machinery. So it'll take a lot more acreage. You'll have less yield per acre. and you'll have more demand for plant foods. There's a conflict there. Lower supply, more demand. There's a conflict there. According to the WEF's own predictions, more than 1 billion people will be displaced by quote unquote climate change, as they say. Food production will have nothing to do with that, or the lack of food. What do they mean by displaced? Now, remember, this is by 2030. Their own predictions, not mine, their predictions. Remember the UN's projection of 860 million starving we talked about in the last video? Are those two connected? The displacement, the starvation? They're not unconnected, my opinion. And they keep saying countries need to be accommodating of refugees. What they, don't mention are the examples we have of accommodating refugees, a flood of refugees, which 1 billion people moving is a flood of refugees. They don't ever mention how, for example, San Francisco and LA handle their flood of refugees, or the refugees at the border of the US. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's a picture outside of LA, I believe, of refugees and being taken care of. Here's another picture of a refugee camp. Kind of cool, don't you think, when you love to have all of these sprouting around? And obviously, there's no increase in crime, violence, whatever. And in San Francisco, we've got the well-known Poop Town. Literally have homeless people and refugees relieving themselves on the streets. And you think, well, that can't be common. How common is it? Well, here's a map that somebody ran for a while that took all of the poop complaints and located them on a map of San Francisco. Now, whether you want to call this common or not, I don't know. These were, if I remember correctly, this was within the last week's period. Now, the developer of this ended up taking it down because he felt it was used to mock or be not an advocate for the homeless. So the site no longer exists, but this is a picture taken from, one day there on the site. The homeless problem, the poop problem. Are you ready for that? There'll also be a tax on any production that pollutes. Higher prices, less production is the goal. Now, less production or less carbon production, less unsustainable production. That simply means that there'll be less jobs, less upward mobility, less products. So fewer jobs, fewer products. There'll be a global tax on oil, natural gas, coal, which will reduce the supply of energy and increase the price. But again, you won't need it because you won't own a car. Everything you need will be delivered to you. Everything you're allowed will be delivered to you. You just won't have as much need for a car, or getting around, or transportation. And I love how they talk about preparing to go to Mars, as if people would actually be able to go to Mars and live. The cost will be billions per person, or for a very small handful. So what you'll likely see is the rich corporate heads, they'll, be able to send back pictures from Mars for the minions. Regardless, don't think I want to live on Mars. Just know. WEF also brags in their prediction that Western values will have been tested to the breaking point. Now, consider this for a minute. What are traditional Western values? Well, according to Wiki, not my words, not my own whimsy, but according to Wiki, it says, during the Reformation and Enlightenment, the ideas of civil rights, equality before the law, procedural justice, and democracy as the ideal form of society began to be institutionalized as principles forming the basis of modern Western culture, particularly in Protestant religions. Well, that's what the Great Reset wants to undermine: traditional Western values. And these, Western cultures, how do we identify Western cultures from other cultures? Well, they're historically defined by a Puritan work ethic. individuality, scientific rationalization, which simply is, and I need to be clear about this, the scientific process. And when I say the scientific process or science, I've heard some people say, you don't trust the science, you don't believe the science, as if the science was a fact, was a settled issue. Science has nothing to do with a settled issue. It is a process of discovery. So every time you see science, you ought to insert process of discovery. It is this process of discovery and people debating it, coming up with alternative explanations, ideas that leads to the refinement and improved science. Science is never a final, this is the way it is. I'm have high HDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. So I'm taking a statin. Well, just read a paper today talking about how statins may not actually treat the real problem and may introduce complications that are worse than the actual problem. The paper was also making the argument that the bad cholesterol may actually not be bad for you. How many times have you seen this in science where, salt was good and fine, and then salt was bad, and now salt is kind of back to being good and fine? Science changes. The science, as new information becomes known, as new information is discovered, alters its view, adjusts its view. And that's the way it should be. That's science. It's not a set of fixed beliefs that if you don't believe, you're an idiot. If you don't question, that would be the bigger problem to me. So how is this to be implemented? Now, Schwab, the leader of the WEF, World Economic Forum, tells you in his book, we talked about his book before, he states, government is the difference between living and dying. His words. He tries to create the notion that all of society's ills are due to too little government, which is interesting, particularly for those in the US. Historically, we have held that government is not the solution, government is the problem. His solution to the problems that the world faces, that individuals face, is simply more government. Society will then be more inclusive. The world will be greener. Corporations will be stakeholder oriented. Everything will be solved. Simply put, you'll have less freedom and less opportunity, but you'll be happy, along with owning nothing. Government will take care of you. How has this worked in the ghettos when people own nothing, have no hope, no future, no advancement? Do you think they're happy? Do you think it makes them happier? Do you think the people in Sri Lanka are happier with less food, being taken care of by the government that ends up running out of money, can't even buy food? Under the Great Reset, they're very open. Everyone will be, quote unquote, asked to make more sacrifices. Ask being the operative word here. Government never asks you to do anything. What they're saying is, what the government, quote unquote, ask is to take away your cars, take away your transportation. It'll include you having to stay at home. You'll pay more in taxes, another thing they ask. The goal will be to reduce income inequality, but they'll have fewer jobs and more taxes. And if we look at the WEF's ideas, many of which were implemented during the COVID pandemic, income inequality increased. During Sri Lanka's implementation of a green revolution, income inequality increased. It widened. Personally, I'd like to see this version of socialism or fascism, whatever you want to call it. I'd like to see it actually work before we go fully live with it. So somewhere I'd like to see it work. It's been tried in over 100 different instances that I could list, and it's failed in every one. So let's figure out the bugs, and then we can take a look whether or not we want to go with it. They also talk about less conspicuous consumption. How beautiful is that? Less conspicuous consumption. That sounds like a pretty noble goal, doesn't it? Well, this won't be a problem under their rule or administration. You'll be told what you can consume and it'll be delivered to your door by drone. So, looking at all this, what to expect over the next few years or decade? And we're talking honestly about a slow integration here. This is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in months, even though the process is further along than many want to admit. Expect continued attempts to divide us. We've always had different opinions, but have been able to remain friends, partners, or as a society, we could handle disagreements fairly respectably. Well, that's been shot to hell. So expect more efforts to divide and point out differences, to try to emphasize different classes. Expect banks and government to seek more involvement over your control in daily life, controlling energy, food, money. They're all the keys. Remember Henry Kissinger's quote: if you control the food, you control the people. If you control the energy, you control the country. If you control the money, you control the world. Does that sound like what the WEF is working toward? Now, notice government's attempt to censor differing opinions and label them as misinformation or even treasonous. We've seen it in this country with our First Amendment. We've seen government officials interacting with private information providers and instructing them that this is misinformation, this is un-American, and they should remove it. And they do. And it's even worse in other countries. You can expect high and increasing energy costs. We've seen energy rise over the costs rise over the few years. It's not going to stop. It may vary from month to month or season to season, but the trend's going to be pretty clear. Cheap energy is a key to better living standards. Always has been. It's a key to new opportunities. It's a key to freedom. None of those are desirable according to the Great Reset. Not one. Their goal is to eliminate carbon-based energy, to destroy it, regardless of whether or not there's a cost-effective substitute. And there's not. We're not even close to a cost-effective substitute. Now, you can also expect more pressure on traditional values and the family, more pressure on individuality, individual independence. Expect more and more attempts to enforce conformity, to encourage conformity with the system, with the state, not to traditional virtues, but to government approved beliefs. You can expect continued poor performance in schools. And as an educator, this is something that really sticks in my craw. Old Southern euphemism, but really irritates the hell out of me. The job, most school systems, the job is no longer to educate the kids. We're not in the business of education. We're in the business of administering education. Take a look at this if you doubt me. Now, this chart shows some just fascinating information from 2000 to 2019, which would be even worse if it went further back. But this is worth 1,000 words. If you'll notice down here, the growth in students has been relatively flat. You'll also notice the growth in teachers. The change in teachers has been relatively consistent with the change in students. Okay. But really, what really gets a little concerning is, for example, this line. This is principals and assistant principals, the percentage change since 2000. So since 2000, the number of principals and assistant principals have risen 37%, while only an 8% increase in students and teachers. But wait, we're not done yet. If you look at administrative staff, counseling, diversity hires, or whatever, they're up nearly 90% since 2000. Now, I've argued many times that we spend too much on education because all the money, all the increases have gone into administration. Some school systems have more administrators than they do teachers. Hence my point, we're not in the business of education, but administering education. The kids deserve better. We're not teaching them to read, write, and arithmetic. They're getting more and more information on sex and political preference and whatever. The schools simply aren't doing their job, but they keep demanding more and more and more money to not do their job. The schools are simply more concerned with emphasizing group mindsets, the collective, and discouraging independence or contrary thought. They don't encourage virtues like honor, integrity, those kind of things. They teach and encourage conformity. Going forward, you could also expect less opportunity, less economic opportunity as taxes and regulations increase. That's the natural consequence of them. You can expect fewer choices in foodstuffs, consumer goods, as more and more is declared unsustainable and the production is limited or restricted. You will have to live with less. You'll have to expect a lower lifestyle. Expect fewer cars, transportation choices. Those are huge consumers of energy. It's such a waste, right? Now, as far as preparing for this, those who prepare will be better off than those who don't. But admittedly, the options are limited. My suggestion to everyone would be to learn to grow your own food, at least some of your food, and to preserve it, can it, dry it out, whatever. You want to try to improve your health, if at all possible. Personal health, strength, character will matter. It will make you less of a target for those who increasingly prey on the weak. As there are increasing shortages of food and other goods, you could kind of expect crime to increase as people started to try to obtain more of the things that they wanted. Learn to live simpler. Do it while you can make choices. Learn to fix basic equipment, your washer, your dryer, your refrigerator, your stove. Do basic electrical repairs, whatever. Teach your kids. Teach your kids how to mend and cook. Invest wisely. This is a big one. This is not the easiest, but it's important. You want to look for those things and companies that will grow in this environment. Now, some companies will profit, some will lose, some will tread water. In terms of the future, if this scenario continues to develop, the ones who would profit would be mining stocks, energy stocks, uranium stocks, commodities. Commodities have fallen far behind the S&P 500 in performance. They are going to catch up sometime. Historically favored industries, tech would do well. You can also expect increased centralization. Now, this is a long-term trend, okay? Now, we'll have political ups and downs, but the trend is very clear. The force is strong with this one. It repeatedly has occurred until there is a revolt, a violent one oftentimes, which usually occurs about every 250 years or so in history. You can think about the Reformation, then the Revolution. If we look at it, the timing from the Revolution in this country, we're at year 247. So it's obviously not an exact time, but history has a way of repeating itself through time and space. Will it do it again? I would probably bet more on the yes than the no. Look to hold things of value as currency crises emerge. If there increasingly is an effort to remove the U.S. or to downgrade the U.S. as a nation among many, one of the major steps they'll do is try to remove the dollar as the world's reserve currency, because that's a huge advantage to us in trading and in financing our debt. In trading, the dollar is accepted everywhere. We can just take dollars with us wherever we go. We don't necessarily have to exchange them into local currency, though practical reality is you usually do. In terms of financing our debt, our bonds sell internationally because the dollar is spent all over the world, and these countries have dollars. And so they'll use them to buy treasuries, to buy US goods. They don't have currency risk or exchange risk. So they like buying things in dollars. So that's a big advantage to us. Now, as currency crises emerge, as the dollar is devalued or countries try to undermine it as the reserve currency, which we've seen going on in the world, most recommend gold or silver or something like Bitcoin. But the idea is to get your value out of a failing system. Be aware when the system starts to fail and look for those things that will hold their value. Diversify your values in things that are not controlled by the government or corporations per se. Look to hide your wealth in a way that can't be stolen from you by regulation or currency devaluation. That's key. Now, next few years will be challenging, interesting, fascinating, difficult. But always remember some of these points and be looking. There is always opportunity. One of the worst economic periods we've had is in the late 70s. Well, that was the same time that Apple, Microsoft, Dell, all these companies got started. There's always opportunity. Look to stock up on meds or medical supplies or have alternatives ready. Again, you want to try to improve your health if at all possible. This is an important one. Try to develop a separate stream of income, some side hustle. It's possible. There's tons of different opportunities or ideas, but do it. Any small increment in cash or cash flow you can generate, good. Expect income inequality and poverty to continue to increase as living standards are reduced. I mean, California is a perfect example of this. It went from the golden state in the 1970s under Reagan to the state with the most poverty under Newsom. Ideas have consequences. Don't expect your full pension or even Social Security. The dollars just aren't there for most plans. The math doesn't work. What I mean is, most, like a lot of state retirement, a lot of corporate retirements, have huge unfunded liabilities. Social Security Administration has huge unfunded liabilities. An unfunded liability is simply that this entity has made promises to pay people when they retire, take care of their medical insurance or whatever, but they haven't put enough money aside to cover that future expense. So the difference between what they have put and what they should have put aside is the unfunded liability. You'll remember Detroit went bankrupt a few years ago because they couldn't afford their retirement system. And the people who retired expecting full value are getting a fraction of what they were originally owed. There just wasn't the money. The math doesn't add up. It doesn't matter what you think you put into the system. It doesn't matter what promises were made to you. The math just does not work. You need to be aware of that. You need to plan for that. You need to be prepared to take care of yourself and your family. Basic energy and food supplies. Now, please understand, this is not a doomsday scenario. Obviously, the world can change in a heartbeat. If you look at the last WEF conference in January, they even started changing their tone. They did not, but let's be clear, they did not change their ideas. They just restated their premises. You still hear the same basic ideas. Carbon's bad, sustainability's good. All these the ideas haven't changed, but they've seen some people rise up against their clear message. And so they're trying to soften and tone it down some. The, the world can change in a heartbeat, but it's in my opinion foolish to ignore or deny that there are major forces at work in this world, forces that have made progress in achieving their goals. You look at the power structure of the WEF, it's some of the world's leading power brokers, politicians, presidents. It's some highly influential group. It is better to understand and prepare than simply hope that this continued change won't continue to happen, won't continue to occur. Now make small changes in your life and your habits, your hobbies. Don't seek, I wouldn't suggest to anybody that they just turn their world upside down and go into a shell and whatever. It's not what I'm saying. I want you aware. I want you understanding some of the ideas, some of the long-term consequences, so that you can better plan, prepare, adapt. Understand that the world is changing. Adapt, improvise, overcome, always. Now I remember seeing Jordan Peterson once. He was asked, how do you guard against paranoia or, you know, embracing conspiracy theories when you're constantly looking at matters of intrigue? You know, is my view shaped by my own personal perspective or bias? I would say three things to that. I have never been prone in my life to embrace theories of human actions per se, but am by nature pretty analytical, very evidence based. I'm always questioning, always asking questions, and a huge fan of scientific rationality. That's one point. Second point is everything I mention on here in these videos is available on the web. It's easy to find, either in books, print by the parties discussed, by mainstream media articles, by the WEF's own website, by their own YouTube site, their politicians' own speeches, by actual policies implemented in countries like Sri Lanka. I'm not implying anything. I'm just stating what they actually argue for, what they actually do. And third point, I never will ask anyone to blindly believe what I say or blindly trust what I say. I encourage everyone to take it as a starting point and go and verify for themselves. Verify for yourselves. You're ultimately responsible for you. You need to make the best decisions you can, gather the best information you can. I hope to contribute to that in some small way, but verify what I say. I don't fear being verified. It doesn't bother me. I encourage you to do it. I don't fear the truth. I don't fear facts. I don't fear reality. And have often amended my ideas, my thoughts to new information. I think that's what a reasonable person does, is why I keep researching and keep looking and keep questioning. I want to know the truth. I need to, so that I can better prepare for the future, so that I better take care of myself and my family. I don't want to be subject to others' whimsy or demands. I admit to some independence there. I believe most other people are pretty much in the same boat. And I know, as Voltaire said, it is difficult to free people from the chains they revere. I take that sometimes as a personal challenge. Successful or not, I don't know. But I encourage the same. I'm not perfect, but I do try to look for trends and try to follow them. And I'm pretty content with my track record over the past 40 years. So that's the overview. Great reset. Hope you got something of value out of this. Tune in, subscribe, like if you will. Also, if you have some other ideas of interest or some questions, feel free to DM me at Twitter or email me at moffettonmoney@gmail.com. Twitter, moffettonmoney. I appreciate your time. My time is up. Thank you.